ambassadors from Earth to these other civilizations and to learn the protocols of meditation and remote viewing and contact. And we have been doing this for about 19 years now. And this past a couple weeks ago, we went out to California and had a wonderful gathering in Costa Mesa. Had about 500 people at a presentation we did there, and then had a daytime training, just a workshop for one day in the Orange County area. And that night we took about, 80 or 90 people out to Lake Irvine, there in the hills to the east of Irvine, and did a practice for people, and had some really rather astonishing events take place, especially for a group that large. And so we wanted to share that. One of the things that happened is that we were in a very remote canyon by the lake, and we have these magnetometers that pick up magnetic field flux and other electromagnetic detectors. And they had been pretty quiet. Once our team entered the group, there was already a large group assembled by the time we arrived. They began to get very active, and we started having a lot of electromagnetic signals that began to come into the area, including the magnetometer that picks up the flux field or the fluxing of the magnetic field around it, going all the way off the scale. And we knew at that point that there was an element of contact that had occurred that was very, very important, particularly with a group that large and in that remote an area. And this was followed by, of course, we had to organize 80 or 90 people in sort of two semicircles to be out in this remote place. But at about shortly after we were gathering people together and we were having all these detectors going off, we have actually a recording of this. We had a very distinct voice, not human, that was about 3 feet in front of us, just in the air suspended, that said just a few syllables of some kind of language. And everyone stopped and went, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" And a great many people in the circle, even though we were outdoors with a large group, heard it. And in fact, Linda, it was closer to Linda than it was to me. You might want to describe what you heard.
Yes, it was like just this disembodied voice that happened, as Dr. Greer said, about 3 feet up, and it was sort of just to the very slightly to the left of my left foot, and the woman next to me, who's a nurse from the California area, heard it as well, and to me it sounded like, well, it was an unintelligible word, but it was at least 2 to 3 syllables long, and it was extremely audible. It was as loud as I'm talking now, if not a little louder, and it was a very distinct male voice. And my recorder then would have been approximately 3 feet away from it. It's a very high-quality recorder, and it would have picked up the whole sound because all the syllables were equally audible. And what's so really strange about it is it only picked up one syllable. And we know for sure, because immediately after we heard it, you can hear us discussing, that it was multiple syllables. And the recorder picked up one syllable, which, we don't know. You can't really tell what it says. It just sounds like kind of, it's one short syllable. But what's so bizarre is that if it had been a normal human sound, the recorder would have picked up all the syllables because it was so audible.
Right, and yet everyone, well, not everyone, but most people out there heard it. It was loud enough, and it was definitely a male voice. So we went, well, this is strange, because we had already begun to see some subtle sort of vortices of energies and orbs that people were photographing that had moved in around the group. And one of the things I've talked about for years is that if you're an interstellar civilization and you're traveling faster than the speed of light, your technologies are going to be, what the guys at the CIA that I've met call WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, is literally what they call it. And it's very advanced sciences, where you can actually have a spacecraft or an extraterrestrial being that's being electronically and transdimensionally projected onto a site, and to the point that you could actually have a being appear and then vanish, or have an orb appear, or have an energy field that would appear, and within it is being held the actual visitors. And this is the kind of thing that would then also set off these electromagnetic detectors, which they've now chosen to use to communicate in different sequences and patterns, which has been occurring since the Orion transmission started 2 years ago in Joshua Tree National Park in 2007, and which became over 5 hours of those sort of events in 2008, and now is happening somewhere around 4 or 5 hours a night now, whereas before we could sit out there in the middle of the national park and we would never hear a peep out of any of these devices. So the veil, as I say, is getting thinner, and the time of open and absolute open contact is obviously approaching and becoming more pronounced. But this event, because it was with so many brand new people, it was not as if this was our, central team that's done this for, a decade or two together. Many of these were people who had just only been in an afternoon workshop, and then we hit the field, hit the road running as we do, and went out, and we began to have these manifestations of intelligence around us literally in the first half hour. I mean, it wasn't as if it was many hours into this expedition on that particular night. It was actually a Saturday night, I believe it was the 15th.
Yeah, it was the 14th.
14th, so the 14th of November, which is not long ago, a couple weeks ago. And what we found was that around this time there was a brilliant light, like a blue-white light that appeared right above my right foot. I had my legs stretched out, and almost everyone in this whole group saw this. And then shortly after that, there were two more that came zapping in on the opposite side of the circle that were seen. And then subsequent to that, there was one that came in very brilliantly right in front of a woman that has been on a number of our week-long expeditions where we train people to be ambassadors. And we knew that these were actually extraterrestrial beings that were coming in transdimensionally and were interacting with the group and joining in the meditation we do for the healing of the world and universal peace. And these were visible with the naked eye by anyone looking in those areas. In fact, when I asked everyone there if they had seen these brilliant flashes that came right into this darkened area where we were, almost everyone did. So anyone looking in that direction saw these. And then we continued to have the contact and the communication through all these detectors. And this is was sort of a warm-up to the kinds of events that were going to happen in the next day and the following week up at Joshua Tree National Park. So, one of the things that we've decided is really critical is to have large numbers of people who understand the sciences of consciousness and all the different so-called cities or manifestations of consciousness and the different powers of awareness that are talked about in the ancient Vedas, because these interstellar civilizations really do understand this and use them as a routine means of contact and communication pretty much as easily as we would talk on cell phones or telephone lines like we are today. And I think this is one of the exciting things about the work we're doing, is that it's giving people the experience of interstellar transdimensional extraterrestrial reality, and so that they understand and actually see these sort of things happening. And of course we also had a couple of objects that flew right into this canyon where we were, that we saw that between a mountain and a lake that came in that were lit objects, and multiple people saw these, and then they would vanish. And we actually have a number of these on film. And people said, well, what is this? I said, well, you have to understand that you can have a group of extraterrestrial beings or an entire spacecraft that is resonating beyond the frequency of matter and the speed of light and the speed of electrons, if you will, that are through the crossing point of light. and all you will see as it moves in, or if it's hovering, is something that will look like a spherical orb or a brilliant flash of light or something like that. Now, of course, when it comes all the way through into three-dimensional space-time, you'll see the whole spacecraft, and they can become fully materialized. And in fact, at Joshua Tree a couple of years ago, we had 4 extraterrestrial beings that were fully materialized briefly outside the circle during a meditation. And then when people look back, they had just simply vanished. And I think that this is the sort of thing that for most people sounds like magic, which is, of course, why the folks in the intelligence community call this weird science and frickin' magic, because the kinds of technologies you're dealing with that deal with interdimensional or transdimensional reality and technologies cross into the interface between thought and consciousness and their electronic communication systems. But also what happened with these brilliant objects that were seen in the circle at Lake Irvine with this one-day sort of training group that we did is that I'm fairly certain those were actually extraterrestrial beings, because we did hear this voice that was just suspended in the air and disembodied, as Linda said. What's interesting about it is that, and you're going to hear this in a little while, is that these, I've often called this a sort of electronic and technological astral projection. It's like if you have a lucid flying dream, or like the Rosicrucians teach, out-of-body travel, that you have your body of light, that's the so-called astral or thought conscious body that has form and light and shape to it, that the extraterrestrial civilizations that are interstellar have the means to teleport or transport that into an area at multiples of the speed of light, or hold it there. And oftentimes the only evidence of it will be an orb or a light that's moving through, or a brilliant flash of light that comes into the area. And that may then be later followed by a being or a vehicle, an actual extraterrestrial vehicle materializing, which we've also seen. So I think that what's being shown to people as they go through this process is a real tutorial, that's sort of a cosmic tutorial in the sciences of consciousness and transdimensional sciences, which is really the next big leap in human science. Once we get out of the dustbin of coal and fossil fuels, we're going to understand that the universe is so much more wonderful than what people are being taught when they get their PhDs from MIT and Caltech. But I digress. Anyway, so Linda, I don't know if you have other things you want to share about Lake Irvine. It's a very exciting one-night expedition.
Well, one thing that I would like to mention is the man that was sitting just 2 people away from me on my left, where the voice appeared slightly to my left, was a Caltech physicist, as a matter of fact, and he also had a magnetometer and was just blown away by the periodic great bursts of activity on his magnetometer, when most of the time it was just quiet. And he said after we heard the voice that right before the voice spoke, that he had asked the ETs who were communicating through the radar detectors and magnetometers if they could say something, because he didn't understand just the beeping sounds. And it was shortly after that this voice spoke.
Right, and it was very near where he was.
Right, just
right in front of him.
Right to my left, and it was the voice was slightly to my left.
Correct. So, I mean, it was almost as if this ET was responding to this was a thought request he made.
Right.
And so this was quite impressive to this Caltech PhD scientist who was there with all of his gear. And, of course, he had this kind of gear out before. And, of course, we were out in a wilderness area. There is nothing that would make these magnetic field meters go completely off scale. And they were just, as soon as we formed the group and started doing our contact protocols, and we were using the consciousness techniques of going into deep meditation and remote viewing space and where these ET civilizations are, and inviting them to that site for universal peace. We had the CSETI tones that have been recorded in crop circles and in other locations that are beeping tones and they were to retransmit those out into space with radio transceivers. And then we also have bright lasers that we're sending up as a vector. So all that's going on, and all of a sudden all this activity begins that's electromagnetic. And yet this one man, I'm so glad you remembered that, who is a scientist, had one of these magnetic field meters that he had brought out to the site. And he was amazed at the activity, but he couldn't really understand what they were trying to say through it. And so he asked it, wish he could understand, and suddenly this voice says a few syllables really right in front of him. And that's the kind of interactivity that happens with these extraterrestrial civilizations, is that once you're in a state of coherence and consciousness, and in a very innocent way just ask, some manifestation like this will occur that is indisputable, because it wasn't like he just heard it in his head or something. Most of the people there, unless they had their ears covered up and were too far away from the site, heard it, because it wasn't a very soft sound. It was very distinct.
Right.
And also with these brilliant lights that occurred inside the center of the circle. I mean, not way above us in the sky, but at ground level.
By the ground.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 3 feet above us, or at our level of our chest, basically.
Right.
We had these brilliant things, and I know that these are actual ET beings that are being, if you will, electronically projected, astrally projected into the area, that are then communicating with the group. And this is sort of the thing that happens, is happening more and more routinely on these expeditions that we're doing. So there was a very exciting series of events and sightings that happened for just one evening for a one-day workshop.